Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, we've often said that our contact shapes the worldview that we carry. And one of the things that has changed drastically for the Gen Z generation is the advent of technology and how that's changing the way in which they look at work and they look at other aspects of their life. Among that is also the sheer information overload that's coming to this generation. And therefore, the question becomes how do they consume information? In this particular instance, we're really talking about how do they look at information that's coming from media? Is it authentic? Is it short form? Is the medium the way they want to look at? And so we're going to explore how that's shaping the different aspects of the Gen Z generation. And to help us with that is just the guest. And so I'm very happy that we finally made this happen. And so good morning, Janvi. Welcome to the show and very glad that you could make it.
Yeah, thank you, Nikhil, for inviting me and really looking forward to have a conversation today.
Excellent. So, Janvi, we'll get into how media itself has changed over time, but more importantly, like how that's impacting Gen Z, or perhaps how Gen Z is expecting media to kind of share the way in which it should be consumed or it's getting consumed now. But first and foremost, please help us to, kind of understand and hear your story. Tell us a little bit about your background, your work that you do for our listeners.
Yeah, so I am political journalist and I've been in the industry for a good 11 years. Work full time with Ahmedabad Mirror, the DNL newspaper, and I have written for IANS. I've worked for more than 2 years with them. And yes, geopolitics is my core area of interest. I'm trying to build a community online and offline on this domain. And so looking forward to discuss and share the kind of experiences that I bring to the table.
Fantastic. So obviously you've been in the profession for many years now, and so let me start before we dive into kind of how Gen Z looks at information and perhaps even what's the role of media and the implications of all of that. But let's just understand, Jamie, from your point of view of how have you seen media evolve? Just if I were to just start kind of the big picture story, because back in the day, people were still reading the newspapers, and I suppose they're still reading, but the forms are changing, the mediums are changing, and even the durations are changing. So, can you give us a kind of a bird's eye view of like how has media evolved, and what's the implication of that?
Yeah. So to start from my own experience, that I started from print media, went to digital media, and then worked for a news agency. So I've seen the whole graph of earlier you had to wait for like a few hours or the next morning to get the newspaper and steal the newspaper to actually see what has happened in the world. And now it's all about time. Now it's all about being fast, being quick in delivering the news. And in that process of being quick, sometimes we miss out the crucial factors of fact checking, or we miss out in identifying that what the other person has to say on the news that we are curating or writing about. So in the process of being which is its authenticity, which is the facts that we include in our news article. So there are a lot of benefits that we are now, this generation or the young generation, is experiencing news first time. It is experiencing news live when it is happening, then and there. Like something is happening in Ukraine right now, and the Gen Z are watching it on the cell phones. This is the kind of luxury that the older generation did not have. But having said that, whatever people are consuming on the cell phone, it is quick. But is it real? Now that is the bigger question that our times in this times we will have to deal with.
So you touched upon the sort of the $1 million question, Janvi. I think let's dive to it. I think the listeners are really, really. I think one of the things that perhaps from the other generations that I see this from even the work context, I get time to time like forwards and I'll share this with my son and he'll say, "Oh, this is fake news." I mean, there's a way for him to quickly know that this is a fake news. But I guess that's a uh, very sharp observation or an observation which really requires someone to kind of do their homework. So help us to understand, I think, the big debate that's there between the source of information and a generation which is so used to consuming something here and now, right? And you get information so fast, so quick. You had AI, which can manipulate and kind of create different information. So um, let's understand that when you get a piece of media or a data or information from the media source, right? What should the Gen Z do just in terms of ensuring that there is authenticity?
So now this is a question that yes, we are referring to Gen Z on. How do you decipher on whether this is real or this is fake? Uh, Fact checking is something which we are taught as journalists now because due to AI or due to just loads of fake news being uploaded online. So now there's a whole stream or domain of specializing in how to decipher the fake from the real. That's a whole skill set altogether. But one thing which needs to be done not by Gen Z, because we at elders cannot put all the onus on Gen Z on identifying and deciphering. I think the world is still figuring out, just like the Gen Z. We don't know anything better than the Gen Z. And when we look at Indian government, we don't have strong framework around fake news. Yes, the government made some changes this year itself, but still, these are all baby steps. And again, it's not just India and policymakers and rules around AI. Even if we look at the world in a nutshell, the world is still struggling on because you cannot cap everything that is created by AI. You cannot put it in a box. You can bring out some rules that, if you are 16 years or below, you cannot use social media. But these are rules good on paper, but are they executed well? That's the question that the whole world is struggling with, and not just, the Gen Z. So yes, there are tools. Just like you can learn, Gen Z can learn how to use Canva or how to use upload your own podcast on Spotify. I think identifying what's real and what's not can also be taught. I've seen in some countries that students are taught early in school as a subject on how to, differentiate between what's real and what's not. But I think the world itself is learning, and I think it's a work in progress.
So, John, you're right, and I just go back. I remember, I mean, I think just the change in administration that has happened in the United States, and I looked at it as an example. Like there used to be ways to fact check, but it seems like even that was leaning in its ideology of one way towards the other, and somehow it wasn't an agreement. And I think that just totally scrapped. Now, you're right. Everyone is learning. Certainly, as media professionals, you or that fraternity needs to do the homework. But right for the consumer, and you're absolutely right. It's not applicable just to the Gen Z, right? It's applicable to just everybody else. Are there things they can do? In other words, can they go to certain sites? Can they cross check with another channel? Because even today, as we know, without kind of diverging into which channel stands for what view, etc. But the fact remains that we've seen that you know there could be media houses or channels or papers which lean towards a one way or the other, and that can really also swing your opinion. So again, I go back to that question again in a different way. What can the consumer, in this case the Gen Z, do? Because in their world there's so much coming.
Yeah. So Gen Zs are facing two sorts of problems, especially when it comes to news and media. First, definitely it's AI and fake news, but the other is also propaganda. And sometimes something that's more dangerous than AI is propaganda because you think it is real. Real people are talking to you, but at the end, you're being brainwashed. And that's something that Gen Z needs to be very cautious about. That can, what to say, brainwash them at a very early age so that when they grow up, it is very difficult to change their opinion. And to not fall into the trap, one thing is obviously to not have this one favorite platform where you consume news. It is always important to look at different platforms, even for the same news, because sometimes if a channel or a platform is pro government, they will have a certain kind of ideology, and the other might have the exact opposite, and both of them are analyzing the very same issue, maybe the very same budget that has been announced. So having different opinions, listening to different platforms, and then forming your own opinion is very important, because when you are young and when you are exposed to certain things, it is very easy to influence you. And the other thing I feel that to identify fake news or propaganda is to just sometimes connect the dots. I'll give you an example. You are consuming news from an X platform. It is just one Google search away to know that who is funding that platform, who is the editor, is there any politician being attached to this platform. So when you connect those links, sometimes you just blame a journalist, but that he or she is very biased. But if you connect those links on who is the editor, who is funding that platform, who is the politician behind it, or who is the businessman behind this platform, then I think the communication will be very clear on why you are fed only certain kind of news and why certain news will never be on your feed. So these are very critical questions.
No, I think that is such a good point. I think you said it yourself, and I think perhaps rarely does one go into the other layers to kind of verify some of this, because we just get so used to looking at it and assuming that is as the truth. And I think it can be perhaps done, yeah, just as easily. So, in your experience, Janvi, what have you seen? You've been covering, and you've done, lots of different types of coverages. What have you seen, given what we've just spoken? Have you seen that on ground the Gen Z is getting impacted in their ideology, in their narratives, from what's coming from the news world, or even firsthand talking to them on anything that you may have covered?
Uh, Most definitely. When I'm covering things on ground, or even when my experience of being in the classrooms, either teaching as a guest faculty to journalism students, or to just speaking to them over cups of trial, I have realized that uh, yes, the people in the top of the pyramid have nuanced ways of influencing the younger generation through changes in textbooks, through narratives which are uh, shared with the younger generation in their own language. And mediums such as memes. Now, memes are something which Gen Z relates to, and memes are something that we do not take seriously. It's just about a laughing matter. But trust me, even a topic like geopolitics or even like national politics, the propaganda and the narratives are shared to the Gen Z through memes. And we look at them in a very harmless way. But on ground, I've seen how those little things have impacted Gen Zs on how they are forming their opinion about nation, how they are forming the opinion around religion. And it surprises me because when their opinions are so strong, it is difficult to have a discussion. Otherwise, and they would really take it personally. And I see that as a negative side, because this is their time to just listen to different opinions and not just form strong opinions around the things that they have not experienced firsthand. They're forming opinions on the secondary information, and that's very dangerous.
Yeah. So, I guess the one question that could come, which we have seen a fair bit in the news, January, which of course certainly in let's say in our Southeast Asian neighborhoods, with so much sort of political activism going on, right, led by the Gen Z. What's in your view causing some of that? I mean this more generally. Do you sense, from having just kind of speaking to Gen Z generations all around, or even as you go to teach in schools and classes, right? Is this a generation more globally, like the activist type, because they feel that like a wrong set of cards have been given, or they've lost trust in the system? What in your view is kind of stirring some of this?
So to look at the global Gen Zs, not just of India, I see that this year itself, in 2026, there are more than 20 countries which are going for their elections. And one of the things the politicians at the top are scared of are Gen Zs. Because we have seen, what happened in Sri Lanka, we have seen what happened in Bangladesh, where young people who had nothing to lose They have not built the kind of money, or they have not built the kind of reputation. So they are just happy and have the courage to go on ground fighting the politicians who have been in power for decades. And that's a very bold thing. And that's not just primarily for Gen Z. Any young generation have this hot blood that they can fight the regime. And that's what I see on the global level. That yes, Gen Zs have the power to topple government, but that's just one side of the story. I'll explain this giving you the example of Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, Gen Z came together. They were not happy with the government. They toppled the government to an extent that Sheikh Hasina could never enter Bangladesh alone. Now, is this a Gen Z victory? Most definitely. But then toppling a government is just one side of the story. The main thing is to bring new government in place. Now, is Gen Z actively trying to do that, or they have the mental capacity to do that? That is the question. Because in the recent Bangladesh election, we saw that all those students who were fighting on grounds to remove Sheikh Hasina, they supported a party in Bangladesh which was very radical, which was pro Islamic party and not a secular one. So all this protest, all this anger, but for what? So, do they, are they able to come to a definitive conclusion? Because forming a new government, forming systems is something the old generation is doing, because it takes time, it takes patience, it takes a lot of patience, which I think the newer generation still need to get acquainted with, because they really want everything quick and fast. So these are the issues and also the positives that you can see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in a lot of the stories that we've seen, you mentioned it's driven by what they've seen firsthand of the politicians, as in the case with what's happened in Nepal and in Sri Lanka. And so there is this sense of, why do we need to bear the brunt? We hear other stories like the climate changes, and I think Black Lives Matter and so on, where like it's their sort of very sort of real view of how they wish to make a change. What would you say, Janvi, is the way in which Gen Z looks at media today? Do you sense that uh, uh, they realize that they are inside a time in which they have to do a lot of this verification, authenticity kind of a thing that we've spoken about? Or do you sense that there is just that the trust levels? How would you put the trust levels when it comes to Gen Z seeing media? Yeah.
I don't think that they trust the traditional media at all. Maybe they look it as a laughing material, they look it for the memes. But I see Gen Zs consuming the news on their phones through creators, through memes, um, through YouTube videos. And whether it is good or bad, that's secondary. But what it can lead to is very important, because there are all forms of creators on social media. The ones who would, go with factual reports, the one who would go for secondary reports, and the one who would just want to bring their own propaganda to the table. So, what are these Gen Zs choosing is very important. Because in today's times, when you have AI, when you can create things faster, when you can share your thoughts quicker, the only thing left to us as humans and also as Gen Z is our sense of choosing. It's our taste, which cannot be borrowed sometimes. You have to look at good material, you have to read good things, you have to meet interesting people to form their opinion. And yeah, you cannot just put it in the box where and say that yes, Jay Z is very right in consuming the news through the new age platforms, or they are wrong. It also depends on the in on what they are choosing. So I wouldn't want to generalize it, but in today's times, it is very easy to fall for wrong things because uh, there are a lot of them when it comes to quantity on social media on this platform. And I think that news reaches Gen Z. Gen Zs are not actively looking for news. That's what I see. Because in other countries, I have seen surveys that people are consuming the news through TikTok, or through other just social media platforms, and not even going through news websites or news channel, even if they would just want to look at news on social media. So these are changes, and I think we will see the long-term impacts on when the Gen Z grow up. I think in a few years we'll see how the news has impacted them and their opinions and their life choices.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. I think you mentioned about TikTok. So I'm curious now, what would you say then, Janvi, as someone in the media space, right? Whether you're a media house or just let's say a simple channel versus a paper, right? You talked about TikTok. Like, are you then competing with the creators of today? And therefore, if you have to cater to the customer, right? There's certainly from the Indian context, like the other day I was giving a talk where we said that there's in our country there's at least 37 crores worth of like the Gen Z population is fairly large, right? So what should the media kind of be doing to cater to if you look at from a consumer point of view? Is it the quickness? We spoke about authenticity. Is it being at the right places, or do you sense that maybe the traditional form, like you also need to be on some of these other platforms like Insta and TikTok, but how do you kind of you know um, the lines are blurred where some of the information that you see in some of the other platforms, like not necessarily coming as a news feed, but it can be looked at like a news feed, right? So if you're in the media space, what should you be keeping in mind to compete with this, right? And kind of to serve the new customer.
I think if millennials or boomers want to cater to Gen Z, then they have to speak to Gen Zs in their language. And their language and where they are can be on social media. It can be through joke, it can be through memes, it can be through song. News can be shared on in any of these mediums. To give you an example, the platform called First Post. Now they talk about news, geopolitics, but they have this segment called Joke of the Day, where they share a joke, they share the memes that Gen Z are sharing on social media. Now this is traditional media. This is something which is telecast on your TV channel, and now they have something which Gen Zs understand. So you see, the traditional media is making an effort to cater to Gen Z because you cannot ignore them. They are, very large in number. So speaking to them in their own language, number one, is very important. But I see that what Gen Zs are winning in is like whether the news is factual or not, they are winning when it comes to creatively presenting it or having a personality which is very relatable to their fellow Gen Z. And what the boomers and the millennials are winning when it comes to catering to Gen Z is majorly on giving factual news, giving analysis, which is backed not by secondary information, but also by experience and also by having some idea of the history. Because what Gen Zs miss out is like you see an incident, but you cannot relate the dots backwards, which is very important if you want to understand any news in totality. To give you an example, Russia-Ukraine war. The Russia-Ukraine war, if you see on social media, and I see how Gen Zs are consuming, on the surface level, it looks like there is a fight between Russia and Ukraine. But it is only through analysis and through factual analysis you realize that Russia is fighting NATO, Russia is fighting Europe, or Russia is fighting American soldiers. Why are they doing that? This thing is very important, and that needs to be communicated. And I think that journalists who have experience or creators who have experience can put this point forward. They can go beyond the surface, and that is very important to understand the full picture, whether of news or of anything, any topic that Gen Zs are interested in. So this is what the other generations bring to the table for Gen Z.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we're in an age with so much, as you from your examples of the conflicts and the regional conflicts, like the whole information warfare is quite real, right? And I think what you say versus what you don't see, all of that really it kind of needs to be, you do need to do your homework and you need to go beyond what you're seeing. So one other question here, Janvi, which is that I think from a work perspective, I say that this is a generation where, post COVID and the hybrid world, and I've done episodes where we talk about the pros and cons of hybrid, but the fact remains that if you're in hybrid, like there's a chance you're you're waking up early, staying late, and so on and so forth. And in a time where like work has entered our kind of personal lives in a way, but because of the hybrid, it's also kind of shaping and how we look at the whole personal and the work equation together. So what advice would you give? I mean, or what is your view here for companies or bosses or managers, right, of Gen Z, where so much of their time, whether it's at work or in their personal space, can shape their narratives? And like, what should a company or a boss keep in mind to kind of keep it cogent and keep it so that, again, um, it's not really kind of bringing in some way the baggage to the workplace.
So, so I have been a part of the process that I had to like hire Jazzy, train them, and eventually make sure that they are retained. And in this whole process, I have learned that uh, foundationally we have to understand that Jersey act a certain way because their starting point or their idea behind work is very different. For say the boomer generation, we can say that my father started with 100 rupees and he was very poor. But the problem of Jay-Z is not roti, kapda, and makan. Their basics are sorted. And if your basics are sorted, you are not approaching work from a sense of scarcity. And that makes all the difference. So today, if I don't like my boss, I don't like the vibe, a Jay-Z can resign then and there. And I have had resignation letters where the Jay-Z just sent me an email that thank you, and my last day in the office was yesterday. So they can do that, and I still wonder how. But what makes them this kind of employee is their authenticity. If they like the kind of work they do, they'll continue. If they don't, then you can't make them stay just with the power of money. Or the former employers or the former business owners used to stop maybe the millennials or the movers with the kind of money you put on the table for us, the kind of salary you offer. But that's just the starting point for Gen Z. That's not the all for them. And this is very important for anyone who wants to hire or work with the Gen Z. The creative satisfaction matters more. And also the fact that in the traditional business environment, I see a lot of scope for abuse. I saw a lot of scope for ill treatment, not treating humans like humans, even though we call them human resource. There was this kind of toxicity, and we labeled it as discipline. And this is what the Gen Z is undoing. And that's why we don't like them. Because authority always likes people who obey, who do the kind of work that's given to them, and who keep their mouth shut. Now, this is something you cannot expect from Gen Z, and that's why employers have a problem. But thank God for the younger generation that the train of toxicity is ending, and yet it will make the authority uncomfortable. Now, the authority can be politician, the authority can be the business founder, or the authority can be the HR in an organization. But what we'll have to learn to finally understand that we are dealing with humans. And when you're dealing with humans, they need work life balance, or they need the sense of creativity, or they need this sense of comfort, whether they would want to work from office or from home, but the work is done. So changing these rules, I think, was long due, and now we need to give a workshop to the HR on how to, deal with Gen Z instead of just blaming the younger generation for that matter.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think you're so very right. I mean, I see with companies, so much of the work that I do, it's about showing empathy and understanding their world, right? It is, as you said, one generation comes from scarcity, so they value stability. Another generation comes from growth, so they value, the opportunities and the growth. And in Gen Z's case, it's so much turbulence. So I think they see it in a certain way. So, Janvi, as a way to close out, just where do you sense this can go from here? As a way, we've spoken about kind of the ways in which media has changed. How do you think about and, fact checking and the impact of that? We talk about it, hear about AI being so much now entering our lives, and if we had to extrapolate out, right, with so much of that, and now also looking at how do you sense the media could kind of go from here, what is sort of the final question? What is the advice that you would have as a media professional for the people in the media space, right? To say that, okay, what's your sort of fiduciary responsibility as you think about how you cater news. There's an element of competing for the market share and the ranking and all of that. But with so much changing and, as you mentioned, so much of that can be backed by interest groups and so on and so forth. So what would be the advice that you would have from a media professional to the media world? And then I think the more important one would be also to the Gen Z, right? Or the consumer here, right? Like, where do you see what should be the do and the don't for them as a way to think about, moving forward?
So moving forward, I think that the one advice for fellow media professionals who are, dealing with Gen Z is that Gen Z has an overload of information. What they don't have is like analysis, opinions, and the ones who are factual. So I think what we can work on is not to deliver the news in the crookedest way possible, but to explain it between the lines. That this happened, but why did this happen? Why did it happen at this time? Who did this? And what can be its possible outcome? So to explain it to someone in the easiest way possible, like you are explaining to a 5-year-old child, but the topic which is very difficult, which demands a kind of analysis. I think this is what we need to do a lot more to simplify things, to analyze things for the younger generation, and then let them decide on, the kind of opinions they would want to face around it. So in the future, I think that that will get more traction, and that is also needed for our younger generation. And the other
That's on the
thing is,
media side. Yeah. What about the Gen Z?
like, what advice I would give them as
Yeah.
journalists
Where it's
when it
about consuming, yeah, given where the pace of information is coming so rapidly and so much of the content is happening and so many more media outlets are happening.
I think that if I had to speak to a Gen Z today, I would say that whatever you consume online is the beginning of a lot of things. It is not the end and the final thing. And how it is the beginning, I'll explain that. I'm not saying that, say, if you read today something about de-dollarization, if you see an analysis, a comment, a reel on it, then consider it as a starting point. Bring your curiosity in place because if young people are curious, and maybe go for a podcast. I'm not saying go for a book because I don't know if they would want to go to hardbound books, which they should, but maybe a podcast or maybe a YouTube explainer or just expand on that to form an opinion and which is very important. So don't consider that reel and the creator having the final judgment or anything for that matter. Even if it's a simple thing like baking, like always look for other opinions on the same thing.
On that golden advice, and I really, really like what you just said, Janvi, both from a media perspective to ensure that, look, let's give the customer the story beneath the kind of the iceberg, right? And I think it is so important on how quickly people can form opinions, and how quickly people can kind of start believing things and so on. So I think that it's perhaps at one level obvious, but it's very refreshing for you, and thank you for kind of reiterating that. I think it just I think it's something that we need to hear that. And then I think even as we heard you talk about the Gen Z, I like that. Look, it's the first starting point. Do not see that as the end source of information. I really want to underscore this for all our managers and the Gen Zs themselves, because in a world where so much is thrown at you, please kind of think about that as you develop the critical thinking muscle, as you develop how you will be seen as a leader. And a leader is one which will always sort of see a contradicting evidence, even though he or she may not agree with it. But it's important to build that perspective. So, Janvi, thank you very, very much. This has been very informative, very, very helpful. And I really hope that I think media plays such an important role today in our lives, and it's become so strong. And at the same time, how we look at it, coming from kind of the inside view is very important. So thank you once again for this great conversation. I wish you all the very best in your travels and hope to meet you in person very, very
Thank
soon.
you so much for having me.
Take care. Bye.